So they had this issue with the handheld, didn't they? Where they couldn't really capture the handheld feeling. So what did they do, Ian? It was so silly.
Well, what do you do? What do you do in that situation? You get a drill. You get a drill, you attach it to the end of the camera with the inch disc, like an inch thick disc of wood mounted off center. It spins the bit of wood, which makes the camera vibrate in a weird way. And there's your camera shake when you're shooting at 120 or 300 frames a second. I love it.
That thing, but that solution, just playing around with the off-centering of gravity, of the center of gravity of the camera, really. It's so simple because it's so smart, isn't it? How do you even remember that, to attach a drill to the tripod? These people were so creative doing this thing. That section of the documentary, it's like about 15 minutes long, the part of the miniatures, and I'm fascinated by not just the creativity, but the sheer skill of these people to film these things, and to capture these images, This podcast is brought to you by Backlight. Backlight Creative enhances the entire creative project lifecycle. For pre-production, there's Celtx. For scriptwriting, beatboards, shot lists, and planning. And Backlight Gem, a narrative design platform for games and VR. For post-production, we've got F-Track Studio to manage creative projects with custom pipelines and reviews with CineSync and F-Track Review for high-res, real-time media collaboration. To manage your assets, connect your own storage to Iconic, a scalable cloud-based media asset management platform. You can learn more at backlight.co. And now on to the show.
Hi everyone, I'm Ian Fales from Befores and Afters, and welcome to this newest episode of VFX Notes. As always, I'm joined by Hugo Guerra from Hugo's Desk. Hi, Hugo.
I feel the need for speed, Ian. I had to.
Hugo, I promised myself I wouldn't use that particular quote during this episode, but it has to be said, doesn't it? It has to be said.
Hey, that's the quote that spawned a franchise of games and films.
We are, of course, talking about Tony Scott's Top Gun today on VFX Notes. Partly that's because of the huge success that Top Gun Maverick has been having around the world. And partly because I think Hugo and I just love this first original 1980s Top Gun that we couldn't not feature it on VFX Notes. And as we've been researching it, I think we've been discovering new things about how it was made that even we didn't know. So that's an exciting thing, Hugo, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. No, this film is a surprise. It's been a surprise to do all this research. Obviously, it was a big film when I was younger, of course. I was 10 when it came out. No, well, it was 9. I was 9 when it came out. And, big blockbuster on the cinema. I didn't watch it on the cinema, of course. I was not allowed to go and see this when I was young, but I got it on VHS. No, this film is, I guess this is the film where Tom Cruise becomes Tom Cruise. The Tom Cruise
definitely.
that we know him today, right hot out of Risky Business, which I love. I think it's a really underrated film. It's a really good film. I think it's one of Tom Cruise's best films. Right after Risky Business, he did this, and the rest is legendary, isn't it? This is the first film where he does some stunts, and he becomes in love with doing stunts, and you can really see it on the behind the scenes where he's like blown away by the fact that he's like doing 2Gs and inside an F-14, a dream of every kid. It was my dream to fly on an F-14.
Yes, I think you suddenly realize Tom Cruise is just enamored by the whole being a movie star, being an actor experience with Top Gun. Which is great, and he continues to do that even today, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and he became a pilot and everything, and he still flies, and he's been flying for a long time. Yeah,
I was going to say, before we jump into talking about the film and the visual effects, I want to give a shout out, as we always do, to our sponsors. Thank you. To our Patreon supporters. Thank you. And a very special shout out and request for people to like and subscribe us on YouTube, and also subscribe or comment or like us on different podcast networks. That would be really helpful, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah. People don't really realize how helpful that is for us to kind of like have more support from these platforms and to actually get bumped on the algorithm and get new audiences as well. It's completely free for you to subscribe. It's completely free for you to leave a comment and to leave a like. Please do support the channel. If you can't support us, through Patreon financially, just consider subscribing. At least that is a huge help for the show.
Mm. Hugo, I've got to do something here. I still can't believe it. I got to give you your dream shot. I'm going to send you up against the best. Us two characters are going to Top Gun. Did I massacre that quote? I think I've done some bad things to that quote, but it's still one of my favorite bits in the movie. Partly because by the time he says that to basically Mav and Goose, we know they're going to Top Gun. But this thing extends out longer than I reckon they would do these days. I still love it, and I thought you deserved that quote.
I would only go if my call sign can be Nuke.
That's not bad.
Can my call sign be Nuke? Well, I wouldn't be able to select. I guess they said that on the commentary that they can't pick their own call signs. That's the thing. They have to get given the call sign, and it becomes like this entire brotherhood thing. It's really crazy.
Love it. I don't know if there's a lot to say about what we think of this film, Hugo, because I particularly love it. Part of the reason is that I'm sure this was the first film I ever watched at home on a VHS tape when VHS machines were just coming into, big time in Australia. And we just watched this and Star Wars about 30 billion times. And I actually remember it being a really bad pan and scan version when eventually I could see it widescreen somewhere. I'm like, oh, wow, we really missed a lot of the film. But I must have seen this 30 times as a under 10-year-old and countless other times, since.
Yeah, that absolutely. It was the same for me, although I didn't... it wasn't my first VHS in my house. No, my first VHS was Firefox, which is also a film with Bill Haines.
Yeah.
I do love that film now. I love that film because I was 7 and 8 and my father couldn't stop watching it. My father was obsessed by Clint Eastwood, so he had all the Dirty Harrys, all these films. Which now in hindsight, should I be watching Dirty Harry when I was 8? Probably not. And that's probably why I am like that. But no, I know what you mean. This film is... We already mentioned Tom Cruise becoming Tom Cruise, but this film is also the rise, really, of Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simmons when became super producers doing almost the biggest blockbusters of the 90s. Throughout.
Totally.
And so the film. I think the film is actually better than I thought when I'm now rewatching it. I actually thought the film is actually much more interesting. It, of course, is a bit cringe sometimes, and it's maybe a little bit too patriotic for my taste. It's a little bit too much flags up and patriot. But it was a huge success, of course. It made all the money in the world. It was it catapulted Tom Cruise to superstardom. It's even very impressive that the film was actually nominated for several Oscars. Of course, it won the song, of course. It was nominated for editing.
You want me to sing that, Hugo? I mean, I'm happy to. Totally happy to.
Oh my God.
No.
Watching the Blu-ray special editions, it has 5 different music videos on the Blu-ray.
But take your breath away. Take my breath away. Wow.
Oh my God.
Wow.
That's good. That's good. No, but the film, I feel like it was nominated for Best Editing, of course, because the editing is outstanding. It's a shame that it didn't win. Also, I think the biggest snub here was that it wasn't nominated for VFX. There was only 3 nominations that year. There was only Aliens, Little Shop of Horrors, and Poltergeist 2. It's a shame. They could have probably snuck in a fourth nomination there, because it was only 3 nominees anyway. And I felt like this film deserved VFX and effects, because back then it was that Oscar was practical and digital. It was all together.
Yeah. Although for so many years there were only ever 3 nominees in the VFX category. So
I'm sure it was on the running. I'm sure it was almost nominated, but it feels like awkward that it didn't. Although of course Aliens, oh my God, you can't compete with that. They would have won anyway. But yeah, this film. I feel it's also like I really recommend people going and listen to the audio commentary on the Blu-ray, because it's a fascinating piece of history, because the audio commentary has 3 branches. It has the director, Tony Scott, and then it has, of course, Bruckheimer. Don Simmons is dead, but Bruckheimer talking about the production side, and then you have all the specialists from the Navy talking about how real it is and talking about all the stuff that they've done on the film. So it's really funny, but it's really interesting to see Tony Scott unhinged talking about the film, because, you know, he was fired 3 times on the film. Yeah. He was fired 3 times, all because of really idiotic things here and there, but he was really not gelling well with Hollywood. You know, he was a commercial director, hot of really doing a lot of music videos and commercials, just like his brother. He had a really strange style, very artistic style. And, you know, he really thought he was doing a heart movie, you know, and of course, Bruckheimer just fired him 3 times.
Yeah. It was the beginning of this dream team of Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, but also the beginning of these really outstanding, entertaining films from Tony Scott.
Yeah.
And my 2 favorites of his, apart from Top Gun, are Crimson Tide and Deja Vu. Many people probably wouldn't put Deja Vu up there, but I just love that film. It's so weird, that film, that I just love it so much.
Oh, but if you're talking about weird, for me, I just absolutely love Man on Fire. I think that film is outstanding.
Yeah, another
and it's
odd
such
film,
a
but
weird,
watchable.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, Tony Scott is the master of artistic blockbuster. It's really strange. He's like super artistic in terms of his camera uses and lenses and the editing, and even like the way it's cut. It's like a music video sometimes. Super artistic on that side, but then the films are typical blockbuster action flicks. It's a great combination. I feel like he's definitely very different from his brother, from Ridley Scott, but I think also there are similarities as well. They're also very commercial as well. They have a very big commercial side, you know. So no, he has a fascinating career, and it's a shame that it ended so soon. Like I mean, it was tragic what happened. No one really knew exactly what happened to Tony Scott. Like there's a lot of rumors, but there's no certainty of why he committed suicide. And it was very sad to see that happening, of course, because he was still working. Like it was a real shame. He has such a big career. You know, Days of Thunder, one of my favorite films as well. You know, Beverly Hills Cop 2, The Hunger. It's just True Romance. He has so many great films. You know.
Yeah, we will definitely revisit some of those, I think, over the years at VFX Notes. He also collaborated here with the DOP Jeffrey Kimball a couple of times, right, later on. And I guess it is a good time to give a shout out to the cinematography here, because there's a billion beauty shots of this in terms of people on bikes, a bedroom scene, the volleyball scene,
beautiful backlighting, and beautiful light shafts and volumes coming through windows and blue tones. Yeah. It's a and that's very not even the
cockpits
film.
Or the planes, right? No. With this is other kind of cinematography.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful film.
And that's, Hugo, what I like about it. There's like this whole other film within a film in Top Gun.
Yeah,
all these dialogue scenes and non-action scenes. Now, in any normal big action film, I sometimes find that all I want to do is go back to the combat battle scenes, air-to-air sequences. That's not the case in Top Gun. And part of that is the cinematography of those scenes that I really love. Part of it is, you know, they're well scripted. They've become a bit of a parody of each other. But I just wanted to say that about Jeffrey Kimball's work, that I love not just the plane sequences.
Yeah.
And then when we get to the plane sequences, they're also very well shot and beautiful in their own right.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, he's a master of really good looking images. I think throughout his career, he's made some outstanding images. And for example, he's one of the most influential horror genre directors of all times. You know, he directed Jacob's Ladder, which became almost like the most influential film for all horror films and all video games. And you know, like Silent Hill wouldn't be anything without Jacob's Ladder. You know, that film is also outstanding. Has a lot of practicals and a lot of effects as well on it as well. But yeah, he's yeah, it's really the 90s, pure 90s, I know.
So Hugo, we are definitely going to talk about the visual effects of this film in just a sec, especially the miniatures. I'm so excited to be talking about a film that uses miniatures extensively like Top Gun. But there was something I picked up in the documentary for this film. And actually, before I talk about what I'm going to say about the doco, I just want to talk about the doco. How good is it? It's like 2 hours. It's extensive. It definitely covers the effects side of the film, but it covers all that pre-work of like, are we even going to make this? What does the studio think of it? The writing, the producing side of it, the editing side of it, what the Navy thought the hell they were making and like, no, we're not doing this, but then coming around to it. I love this documentary, The Making of Top Gun, right?
It's unhinged as well. That's the thing, isn't it? It's unhinged. Yeah. They say everything, and it's like longer than the film, and they mention all the little problems they had. You would just, like, we were just talking offline, like we would never get this ever again, would we? Like we would never get this again. But this doesn't happen anymore because of all the filtering that goes on. I don't even know how that happened because the documentary is not that old. It's like for the latest remaster Blu-ray that they launched, which exists in 4K. This documentary is amazing. It showcases everything from the production side, the music, the editing. They have extensive interviews from everyone. And including, you get to see something that you don't often see, which is the training that they went through to do this film, which both the training and the way that they managed to convince the Navy to actually modify F-14s, which is insane.
I know.
Like they didn't. That's the funny thing. Like the film, they didn't charge for the F-14s because, of course, it's the Navy. They are not making a profit, but they did have to pay for the fuel, and the fuel is outstanding. They had to like pay $10,000 per hour for the fuel for this thing. It was just insane. And they used to film like 3 hours at a time. So every time they went up to film like a bunch of plates on 3 hours, 30,000 pounds. It was just insane.
It's amazing. It's full of great little tidbits. The funniest person on this doco is Val Kilmer.
Yeah.
I'd watch it just for his bits. I think there's actually a lot less of Tom Cruise on here than you probably would expect. But as you say, I think this doco came out in 2004. It's called Danger Zone.
There is for anyone that wants to buy the 4K Blu-ray that just came out, I believe about a year ago. That one has a brand new documentary, which is just Tom Cruise. It's only him talking. He goes through everything. He talks about all the little. It's not as interesting because it's only him. But there's like in that documentary, must have been recorded a couple of years ago because he looks just like now. So I think. They probably just they probably thought, oh, we're missing Tom Cruise on this Blu-ray.
Yeah, maybe. And as I say, there's lots of little tidbits. One of them is this very famous story of the filming happening on the Enterprise aircraft carrier, and the sunlight wasn't right, and Tony Scott wanted it to turn around, and he like basically wrote the captain a check for. Like, it doesn't sound like very much money, right? It was 25 grand or something.
Just to rotate.
I mean, I was like, wow, that's cheap. But I guess it was the 80s. And, there's full of little fun stories.
They were very helpful, weren't they? Like, they turned the ship around. They helped with the planes. They even fired one rocket. They fired the missile, which is on the film,
Right,
and
yeah.
which they then reused with flipping and mirroring and flopping. They used it multiple
it.
times on the film in
love it.
small crops and small zoom just to reuse the same one missile that they managed to fire.
Yeah.
No, but the I think my biggest thing with now starting to jump into the actual effects and VFX, like my biggest thing really with this was the fact that they. Now I think this is normal, of course, training. We saw that on The Matrix, for example. They spent like 7 months training Kung Fu for the film. But this really happened. They went in with extensive training. They had to train for the G-forces. They had to go to pools. They had to train for how to actually use the parachute in case there was a problem on the plane, because they were actually flying in the planes. So they were briefed and trained even on taking their breath for a long time in the water. They were thrown into the water. They were thrown, like they have all this equipment that they do for training. They actually went through the whole thing, and it was very rigorous. They must have been very difficult to go through all of that. Only a few of the actors went through that. Famously, Val Kilmer never went to a plane. He never went into anyone like he didn't want to.
He knew. He didn't want to vomit. He didn't want to vomit. That's it.
Everyone vomit except the actor playing Goose. He never vomited. So it was. I guess he was I can't remember his name, but he was
Anthony Edwards.
Yeah, exactly. Like I guess he was a natural to play on these things.
That's right.
No, but it's fascinating, isn't it? And to see them being thrown into the pool and being thrown into these ramps that go down, and then being inside the pressure chambers and losing their senses. They're like playing with cards, and they're like starting to lose their senses. They can't
They're
even
doing like whatever that is.
And they're like flipping. Oh, I can't even touch.
Yeah.
We don't see these things anymore that much. Like I felt. Obviously, all actors, no disrespect, all actors, of course, train a lot for their films. But it's the fact is that we never see these things. We never see this kind of footage. This kind of opening that we see in here.
Agree. Yeah. I mean, this is where Hugo and I are talking about stuff that's on the documentary.
Yeah.
I actually introduced the documentary because there was one particular thing I just love seeing in it, and Tony Scott talks about it, which is how they felt they were going to get any kind of live action photography that was useful. And they just, it sounded a bit experimental, I feel. And Tony Scott often says in that doco, we needed to do things that weren't really done before. Otherwise, people would just think it's another flying film.
Yeah.
One of the things that maybe it's not original, but it totally worked, was they found this mountain that had a big wide open space around it, basically salt flats, I think. They set up a camera. They sat in a bit of a turret at the top of this mountain and had real jets fly towards them and peel off. And you can see this footage. And, the only problem with seeing this footage is that when you then watch the film, you can kind of tell that they use a lot of it, for pieces. But A, I feel like that's scary for the crew. B, it's just such an obvious thing to do, go and shoot something with lots of space around and get as many different passes as possible. It's only one of the ways that they got some live action footage. But I for some reason, Hugo, I really connected with that.
Yeah.
And it was such a fun thing to see the behind the scenes.
It's because it's beautiful footage, and also it has that kind of like realistic feel to it. And I feel that I really feel that
realistic feel. It's realistic.
No. Sorry, I'm gonna say that. What I meant is that Tony Scott, of course, from a commercial world and documentary world, he actually brought in cameramans that are very used to filming on the fly. Like basically shooting live and focus pulling live and actually reacting to footage live, which could be tricky for some cameramans that are very used to for traditional filmmaking, where they might not be used to, because usually traditional filmmaking, you measure the focal and you prepare everything, and then you pull focus, and everything is very exact, almost scientific. This was not scientific at all, because you had no idea if the plane would be slightly on frame or not. They were trying to catch them. And so I feel like that comes from that crew that he brought from that world of documentary and commercial, that really brought in a breath of fresh air into the look of this and the way that it was filmed.
I like how they describe it. They do say we're going for a documentary style. Now, that often gets said, doesn't it, Hugo? I feel from directors and even VFX artists and soups. But here, I know exactly what Tony Scott meant. He meant not too precise, because how would you film warbirds so precisely? Like you can't.
Yeah.
So they just adopted this, like, we'll get what we can, we'll make it a bit dirty, but actually we would film it a bit dirty. So yeah, I love that.
But that's why also the film stands the test of time, because the if you look at, there is quite a few films with planes during the 2000s and the 2010s which are purely CG, of course, like fully filmed in CG, and they end up not having some of this kind of flavor of just like really randomness that this film has, because you can clearly see that they just couldn't get the shot they could, and so they just got whatever they had. And it tends to be that when you have too much control, it tends to be that you become a bit more organized. And I feel like that's why, and it happened again on the new film. The new film also has this look as well, because they went on and shot it again with of course, with extensive visual effects and replacements of backgrounds and set extensions, of course. But they actually went and shot it the same process, but this time, with, of course, with the help of VFX to tidy it up a bit. It's fascinating. Yeah, we're talking about the crew on the ground, but then, of course, also the revolutionary thing about this is the way that they actually shot it in the air. They of course mounted cameras on the F-14s and on the MiGs, and of course they had an external plane shooting and photographing as well with a turret camera.
Yeah, but that was like a Learjet. Yeah, that, which I think people familiar with air-to-air shots would know that these Learjets in Hollywood exist.
Yeah,
with, as you say, a periscope camera. Yeah.
Absolutely. But it was so difficult to actually set the cameras on the plane itself. And again, it's like this kind of freshness from Tony Scott of wanting to rig what we now are so used to as a GoPro camera attached to something. It's almost like he's trying to attach it like a GoPro. And of course, he had to use these special housings because, of course, the G-forces of these planes are so strong that the cameras sometimes would even unlock the lens. The mount would not even hold the lens, and it would just like get loose with the G-force. So it was incredibly difficult, and I find it fascinating that they managed to convince the Air Force to actually modify an F-14, talking about like millions of dollars equipment of actually bolting cameras to it. And I'm guessing they probably now use that stuff on their own training, but yeah, they had cameras attaching below, they had cameras attached on the top, and that's why you have these beautiful shots, not just on the cockpit, but you have these shots outside where you see
external shots.
Yeah, where you see the planes outdoor.
With the plane static, but seeing the action around it.
Yeah.
I mean, also we've got to remind people these are film cameras.
Oh yeah,
right? These aren't digital cameras. I really want to do some research into how these cameras were set off, like whether that's remote or like you just ran them as soon as this plane took off. I must look into that. But
yeah, I actually found some information about that.
Right.
The pilot actually had a controller on his deck, so the pilot itself would be the one controlling when the camera would go. They, of course, were shooting. The magazines had to be very short. Because it wouldn't fit a very large magazine. So when they were shooting a couple of minutes only. And so what would happen is, they would be on radio contract and you would press the button. It would say, okay, it's going now. And then, of course, Tom Cruise and the other actors would do their acting and try to deliver their lines on G-forces and stuff like that, and rolling and everything. And then you would stop the camera, so you would have the control to stop and go. And in fact, there was several days of footage that was unusable because they would either click the camera to first, or they would click the camera and then one of the actors would vomit, or one of the actors' head would be off, or it would be like you would just see the top of his head. A lot of times the takes were unusable. There was nothing that they could even use on them, or the planes were too far away, and so they had to be tighter together for you to actually see the formation of the planes. Because normally on dogfighting, they are really far away. Because if you're there, if they're that close, if they shoot someone, they then get the debris of the explosion. So it makes no sense for them to be that close. So it's they had to like bend the rules quite a lot to make them so close that almost looks like one of these like the Red Arrows on Britain, like the show planes where they're really doing acrobatics. It's almost like
in
that.
formation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think that's in the doco too, which is every now and then the Navy liaison person will say, I can't believe they made us do this. And we hear the whole story about, say, how close the planes were, or doing that spin, a couple of spins are in the film, or even down to like holding a class in the hangar, at the base rather than in the classroom. And they in the doco, they talk about it for about 10 minutes and it sounds like, oh, they really weren't happy. But then eventually you hear that the Navy was like, all right, Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer were right. This is much more exciting and interesting. And I like the honesty there that comes out in that doco, but it relates absolutely to, as you're saying, Hugo, the air-to-air actual flying, which is also not realistic, but looks better on screen. Frankly.
Yeah, all those rolls makes no sense. They keep rolling and rolling and rolling. What are they doing? The guy was like on the audio commentary. By the way, the documentary is really real and they're really honest. The commentary is even more honest. They just say everything. I can't believe I was listening to it and this doesn't happen anymore. I was like, oh my god, were they allowed to say this? But the guy was saying like, oh, they keep just rolling. What are they doing? They just want to throw up. Because even the fighters don't do that. They don't do the barrel rolls because they will throw up. There's no, how did he say it? There's no tactical advantage of doing a roll.
That's great. So in addition to a lot of real photography captured of air-to-air flying or air flying, I don't know how to say that properly. There was actually some really nice use of actors in cockpits, filmed on gimbal sets, on rear projection, and even front projection here, Hugo, that I think intercuts like brilliantly with the whole film. And later we'll talk still about the visual effects and miniatures work. That's because I think, they are still using real footage in the rear screen projection and front screen projection. They are the real actors in there. Although in the doco, we hear that the actors got pretty bored in those cockpits. I just thought that was really effective work that still holds up so well today.
It does, like, and it holds up because it's an actual F-14 fuselage that is there. It was given by the Navy. It was like a scrapped F-14 that was rubbish that they couldn't use, and not. I guess this is the equivalent of the modern LED screen, really, because they had a front and back projection with footage going. That's why they have all this beautiful reflections going on the glass because of the front projection. The footage was actually filmed by stunt people, like actually flying through the airs and actually photographing all. They had a list of photographing. Tragically, even one of the stunts men actually lost his life trying to film this footage, which is again a stark reminder why these days so much is done in visual effects. It's so dangerous to do this, so dangerous. And obviously these days you could just do it in digital and no one would lose their life, Tragically, Art Skoll, which is one of the most famous stunt plane pilots, tragically died and went to the ocean. No one ever found his body or his plane or even his dog, because he was always carrying his dog on his lap. So tragically just lost his life trying to capture these 360 pieces of footage with a rig, trying to like get the background plates for these rear projections. No, but this, like you said, Ian, not only the front projection, but they also had a really clever ring with the lights, didn't it? That was really cool.
Yeah, that was cool, and that gave it again that interactive light that sort of added to the realism. Also, Tony Scott seemed to implement camera on a rotating
Yeah.
360, rig, which this is another example of where he felt that hadn't been done before
Yeah.
with aerial photography, even though it's shot in a soundstage. And now that I think about the film, there's a whole bunch of those rolling shots that match, times when the plane is shown rolling as well. But like they're so unrealistic, really. But they're almost like capturing the giddiness of the pilots,
Yeah.
and also the audience at
Yeah.
certain times, and then the music sparks up as well. So it's like one thing I wanted to say was I feel like that kind of filmmaking is Tony Scott and Bruckheimer and Simpson knowing what they want the audience to react to.
Yeah.
Right? This is a cinema moment. And I feel like that's what Tony Scott was bringing, even with things like camera rigs and lighting setups.
Yeah, yeah. This is typical commercial stuff, gyroscopic cameras rotating all the time, music video stuff, like to make crazy footage for rock bands, and even not rock bands, but even to film live concerts, when the cameras are rolling and doing this like that. It's fascinating to watch. And the rig system was really cool as well. The sun with this 10K light attached to the actual ring internally, so the actual sun would rotate as well for the entire rig. It's obviously today this would just be an LED screen, but this is an LED screen, right? Like there's the footage going, the light is there. It's effectively a volume that they've created. It's exactly like the volume. This is fascinating. I'm sure most of these people on the crew looking at volumes now are thinking, wow, this is a perfect evolution of that. I wish I had that back then.
Wow. And, they filmed like this for decades, right? For different films, even car shots and whatnot. So here it just works because it's intercut.
Yeah.
Beautifully into action scenes.
No, I know what you mean, Ian, but I think the difference on this one was the fact that they actually had lights that were moving on set like we usually have on a volume. And I think the factor of front projection just for a reflection was not that common on just the typical rear projection stuff that you would see on films. So I think they tried to take it one step further with the equipment they had, of course, at the time, So it wasn't, and of course the there's a lot of shots where the cockpit is shaking because they're getting hit and there's tracer fire and everything, just like a bunch of people shaking it.
Of course.
It's so cool. Like we need more shake. Bring 3 more people, and then they're like shaking
3
the whole
big
thing.
guys. Thanks, to do it. Well. Really the second half of all of this is how that then is also intercut and used with miniatures footage, right? We're talking 1985, 6, 7 when this was made.
Yep.
CG is around, but CG isn't a thing used in these films yet at all.
No.
So they need optical solutions or literally practical solutions here. And, what's really neat about this, Hugo, is that there's a nice line or lineage in the work from The Right Stuff, which I feel had some very similar work. And the reason it had some similar work is because it had very much the same visual effects studio, which is USFX, doing it. And, I think the filmmakers were inspired with what they'd seen in The Right Stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That film is also fascinating. Maybe one day we can do the episode about that film. Because it's really pivotal for all these productions. But it makes sense how they shot it, because the other alternative, of course, would be the Star Wars alternative, the ILM setup, which would be like a motion control blue screen. But they talk about this on the documentary, and I guess I'm sure that's what you were going to say, like, it wouldn't just look the same, would it? It would be too clinical. I think that's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess maybe the classic thing here is you arguably could, if you filmed the Star Wars TIE fighters and X-Wing battles, you could have a camera in space.
Yeah.
And you would be more controlled.
Yeah.
And space is a vacuum, so it's not as crazy. Here, if they had gone the motion control blue screen approach, exactly as you say, It wouldn't fit the documentary style. It wouldn't look like air-to-air photography. And of course, if they shot it like that for the miniatures, it wouldn't intercut seamlessly with what had been filmed for real.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad. And we haven't even said how they captured these miniature planes yet.
We'll get there.
I'm so glad they went this route. And it's dirty and documentary style.
Yeah.
That's what I think really they went for, right, Hugo?
It is, and you're right. Like it took a lot longer. Of course, they had to have a week of testing, just testing things. You know, they had to do all sorts of things to get something going. But I think on this situation, it would not be possible because it wouldn't have never matched to the guerrilla style footage they had from the live action. And let's talk about this, how they shot it. You know, location wise, they went in, it was such a clever method. They went to a field which was under construction where the houses weren't built yet, but still had a tarmac. So, which was good because you had the tarmac, which would be safer for the explosions, for the fire, for the gasoline that they would have to use. So it would be not volatile. And then, of course, because it was on the top of the hill, you would have the clear sky. You would have no buildings. You would have nothing around it. And that means that's why this works, because they've actually filmed against the real sky with real clouds, with real blue sky there, just that it was with miniatures. And it's so smart. It's so smart. This is really a testament to the amazing work done, you know, by Gary Gutierrez here, special photography effects supervisor, and by Rick Fitchers, the DOP at USFX. And these people are on the top of their game. All of their crew, they knew exactly how to do these things with the correct macro lenses to make it not look like a miniature. Because when you look at the film, nothing looks like a miniature. It looks very real. It looks incredible. It looks very
real.
It looks incredible. Yeah.
And just to be super clear, a lot of these miniature shots are almost not so much planes moving. Now, they're often falling.
Yeah.
or exploding, or in a spiral, downward spiral. But as far as I could tell from the documentary, at some point Tony Scott visited them on this hilltop in Oakland, California, and quickly identified what he wanted for the miniature shots was tighter close-ups.
Yeah.
And lots of backlighting, as we've talked about already.
Yeah.
What that means is that maybe USFX had an idea that they would have a lot of these planes on wires. They'd run the camera, along, or they'd run the plane along. I feel like they didn't need to do that as much. And instead, they could just secure them on speed rails. And of course, also, Hugo, they could just drop the things, right, from these big man lifts, which I think is like something you'd want to do if you're 10 years old making a film. And here are these trained professionals doing it. But it works. It does.
It does. In fact, there's like a shot, very famously, there's a shot when Maverick and Goose goes down, when Goose dies. There's a shot where the model actually hits the lens.
Whoa. Spoiler.
I'm sorry. Yes, for the people that haven't watched it 40 years ago. Sorry, a main character dies. But yeah, it's fascinating where they actually hit the lens. They actually launch these models out of they have these like men lifts. They are really high up. And then they have like a collection of, some of them actually some of them are off the shelf. Like they actually bought the miniature. Some of them not even built from scratch. So they have a mixture of ones done from scratch, which were like 6 foot or 9 foot. They also have, of course, just the typical like ones that you buy. It was really, on the 90s, this was a big thing, buying maquettes that you would build.
Yes.
It was a big thing, and then you would paint them. And also they have
still
radio
a big
control.
thing, Hugo. Still a big thing.
Is it?
Just
okay.
saying.
Okay. Because I'm saying this, no disrespect. I'm saying this because when I was a kid, there was a bunch of shops like that, just of that. And I don't see them that often now.
No,
I don't
maybe not as much.
But I'm guessing it's all eBay and Amazon now. But yeah, I'm sure it's still a huge thing. I was never into that. I was not patient enough. I tried a few times.
Could have worked on Top Gun, Hugo. Could have worked on Top Gun too. Anyway,
Yeah, but this is like obvious radio control modified planes, 9 foot, 6 foot, and 22 inches, and they just would drop them and actually hit the lens sometimes.
What was that cool story of the assistant who went up 80 feet and they bet him $5?
Yeah,
a pretty good amount in 1985, 6.
That he would hit the lens.
Hit the lens. He did twice. Amazing.
That's how Americans are with bets, you know, like, I'm gonna get it, I'm gonna do it, I have this, you got this. No, but and it's on the film, that shot actually. No, this I guess it really created an environment where accidents could happen, and they had a lot of small accidents that happen on the things that they captured just by sheer luck or by experimenting, either by shaking the camera or either by moving the camera in a certain way or either by exploding certain parts of the plane with different types of gasoline, different types of explosives. Funny enough, like, you know, this was of course very difficult to create because they were shooting 120 frames per second, 320 frames per second, really high speed photography where you would ramp amp the camera, it would be and then it would just stop right away. So they had this issue with the handheld, didn't they? Where they couldn't really capture the handheld feeling. So what did they do, Ian? It was so silly.
Well, what do you do? What do you do in that situation? You get a drill. You get a drill. You attach it to the end of the camera with an inch disc, like an inch thick disc of wood, mounted off center. It spins the bit of wood, which makes the camera vibrate in a weird way. And there's your camera shake when you're shooting at 120 or 300 frames a second. I love it. I feel like I knew that from a different project done like in the 2000s. And then they said, oh yeah, we saw it on the Top Gun, you know, behind the scenes, or read it in Cinefex. And anyway, I love it. I love that kind of solution.
But that solution, just playing around with the off-centering of gravity, of the center of gravity of the camera, really. It's so simple because gravity on the tripod is always set to be so stable, but if you just put something loose on the side, of course it shakes. And it's so smart, isn't it? How do you even remember that, to attach a drill to the tripod? These people were so creative doing this thing. That section of the documentary, it's like about 15 minutes long, the part of the miniatures, and I'm fascinated by not just the creativity, but the sheer skill of these people to film these things, you know, and to capture these images, you know.
They did have weeks. Now, for them, I reckon that was probably like shortened and the budget was probably tight.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that happens anymore, that you get weeks and weeks to do this and do experiments. And gosh, as you say, they made multiple planes and probably shot so much footage that we've never seen.
Yeah, probably.
I hope that Paramount has that somewhere, you know.
And also all the failures is also that happened because they've managed to film missiles, of course, with wires, like just moving and flying through, because they had to have other missiles, and especially the missile hits, because obviously that was not something the Navy would help them with, exploding planes. They of course had like attachments to the planes where they could put in and out so they could explode a part and then put another piece. But there was also a lot of failures as well, like the gun tracers, for example. They really tried to do it on camera.
Yeah, what did they try there? Like more like a fireworks thing with some pyro elements with magnesium powder or something, Hugo. And I think they do show in the doco some footage of that maybe, and it shows the tracers probably being a little bit thick.
Yeah, they're too big.
Bit too thick. Still looks kind of cool. And ultimately, some of that stuff was done with hand-drawn, you know, cell animation, basically. Even missiles were done that way. We'll get to that in a little bit as well. But yes, the failures in practical effects are often learning exercises and create great B-roll too, Hugo. I feel as well.
It does. It really does. That no, but I feel like this... Obviously, we always have this discussion about practical and digital these days, and we always have this discussion, both the two of us here on the show, but also on Twitter. But at this time, they were also having that thing, you know, they again, like proper filmmaking is made. They try to shoot as much as they could for real, and then they use the miniatures to counterbalance whatever they couldn't shoot for real. And it was a perfect merging of both things, you know, just like they did on the new Top Gun, which I find it fascinating. They also shot as much as they could on the real cockpits and the real planes. And then, of course, they implemented all the amazing visual effects pipelines they can now do today to amplify all those shots.
Yeah.
It's the correct way to do it. It was back then, it is still today. And I have a very different appreciation for this film now, Ian. Like, I really do. And I feel like the film, of course, has a few shortcomings, but I feel like the film is actually better than most people probably give it credit for. And when you start looking at the craft of it, it's very impressive. Yeah.
Agree. And just to round out the visual effects work, there's actually a little bit of animation in the film.
Yeah.
We already talked about sort of the cell animated tracer fire, also missiles, but there's these cool targeting shots, right? Like I think I also remember those so well because they reminded me of what video games felt like in the 80s.
Yeah.
You know, when they're doing target locks on the craft. That was done by USFX animation branch. But remember, the tricky thing here, Hugo, is that we're not talking about computer animation. It's hand-drawn, rotoscoped animation that's also matching to moving cameras. So they're effectively, aren't they, match moving the plates, match moving the cockpit views or the planes in those sequences. It makes my head explode to think about how that was all done manually with hand-drawn stuff. And even today, rotoscoping still makes my head explode. But I thought that was very convincing in this film, and I sort of was excited to read about that cell animated work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like really the old-fashioned way, almost like a Roger Rabbit method. It's like did you find out? I couldn't find out what company did this. Did you find out what company worked on that?
Well, I think it was USFX had an
animation was still US
branch.
Okay, the animation branch.
But many of these companies around at the time, now ILM was of course around, Boss Film was around, had model shop and an animation shop. Apogee was doing that as well. So that was quite common. Colossal Pictures had something to do with this film too, and you know they were sort of big in visual effects and related in some ways to USFX, I think. So you know there were a couple of shops on the film. One thing I found really interesting was that one of the animators then at USFX was Wes Takahashi. Now he did go on to ILM to do some amazing stuff on different films, including on Back to the Future. He was ultimately a VFX soup on The Frighteners at Weta Digital.
Oh wow!
You know, a few years later, but he became very well known for hand-drawn effects animation at ILM. So that was exciting to see his name. I just read the Cinefex, which is on Top Gun. The back image is from the film, which I think is cool. But yeah, so cool to have this in print, and has really wonderful behind the scenes on the film, including a fair bit on the animation work. So make sure you get your hands on that. I just wanted to sort of paint the picture of how that was all done practically and hand drawn and hand animated. But actually, if you were using digital tools, you still do it like that.
Yeah.
You still, you know, match move the plates and the things in the plates. You still animate. You still rotoscope. I just love that evolution, Hugo. I think that's something that hopefully in different VFX Notes episodes we can communicate that, yes, the tools have changed, but the approach is actually like based on fundamentals of getting these images that way. As you know, Hugo, in Top Gun Maverick, and I mean, I haven't been able to do a story on that film yet at Befores and Afters, but it's clear that, and Tom Cruise like talks about it all the time, he only wanted to do the film if he could get up into the sky in the plane. Now, they're not flying the planes, right? But they're not flying them in the first Top Gun either. They're in the back seat, you know, being filmed with a really cool camera rig setup actually on Maverick. But that's his base, right? Get me in the cockpit and the other actors. And then, of course, I mean, they're flying in snowy environments to an unnamed country. The planes are exploding. They're coming towards camera. There's clearly a digital visual effects more than half to these shots. But it's about having a base.
Yeah.
And I don't mean a base just for the sake of it. It's a base for the audience to relate to the characters being in the cockpits. And I think sometimes when people whinge about CG in films, what they're kind of whinging about, not just the whinging about bad CG or bad visual effects shots, they're whinging that they just know that the actors didn't do it for real.
Yeah.
Like they want that to have happened. They want a puppet to have done the stuff, right? Or they want a human to have done the stunt. And I think what Tom Cruise gets at is, I want you to feel like we did it. I'm not stupid, and to think that we blew up a mountain, or like we didn't do that. But I get what he's getting at, which I think is that you feel like maybe something is real there.
Yeah.
And it's actually what you feel about just about every effects film done in the 80s, even though sometimes it looks hokey in the 80s. Yeah. He was just going for that in this 2022 version of Top Gun, I think.
Yeah, that's the approach that it should always be done on everything. And unfortunately, that was the failure on certain films that really didn't have that kind of approach, didn't have that kind of shot design, didn't have that kind of like creative mentality. And that's what really like basically dirtied and dragged the name of CG to the mud, from certain things. I'm so fed up of seeing this image of Scorpion King. Get over it, okay? Get over the Scorpion King. CG doesn't look like that anymore. And I feel like we keep getting this example of The Rock on Scorpion King as the, bad CG. Yeah. Well, anyway, rant is over now.
I will finish up by saying that I really hope to do a story on Maverick, but the first thing I want to do is like approach the VFX soup and say, can I do a story? And I really hope he or she might say, it's classified. I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you. That's another one of my favorite quotes. Sorry, I really had to put that in there. And I thought it fit the non-VFX stories happening with Maverick at the moment. I think we're done with Ian's bad quotations.
No, I think we're good. Yeah. Very happy to talk with you, Ian, about this film. I think it's a fan favorite. I'm sure the audience will enjoy as well. And I'm really happy that we got to discuss this in detail.
Yeah, thank you, Hugo. And thank you, everyone, again, sponsors, our Patreon supporters, and also people who like and subscribe us on YouTube and on podcast networks. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Hugo. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.